As long as I can remember, my family has owned dogs. I love being around dogs, and I probably like being around dogs more than I like being around people, if I'm going to be honest. We always got dogs from a rescue shelter. We never went looking for a particular breed of dog or had any preference for a certain kind of dog. We just wanted a dog that looked cute, was friendly, and needed a home, like the dogs I currently have, such as Jasper and Miles. Overall, we would get mutts. Now, if you're not familiar with the American term mutt, mutts are dogs that are mixed breeds and cannot be classified as a single breed. Because of the prevalence of mutts, there are now DNA testing services that will tell you what what kind of breeds are in your dog. For me, I'm just satisfied knowing that they are mutts and leaving it at that. I really don't need to dig into the genealogy of my dogs. And there are a lot of advantages to adopting or getting a mixed breed dog or a mutt. One of the main positive factors is that they tend to be more resistant to health problems that can affect purebred dogs. Many of these health problems for purebreds are due to genetic factors that can be amplified when a single breed gene pool is present. Mutts, on the other hand, have multiple breed genetic pools and can be less affected by genetic issues that are more associated with a particular kind of breed. As a result, they tend to be overall healthier than purebred dogs, or at least fall victim to the predictable conditions that certain breeds of dogs can have. This idea of strength through diversity can be seen across many different areas. And there's this idea that diversity and diversification can increase resilience, reduce risk, improve outcomes, and even more. For instance, in financial investing, advisors will talk about the need to diversify. That diversification of your portfolio will reduce risk of loss because your funds are separated or spread across multiple different areas. Diversifying your defense forces can be a good strategy to build a broader security platform because you are less vulnerable in any one area of security. The list can go on and on. Now, an increasing number of companies have been putting efforts towards diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In fact, DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, those jobs or jobs related to DEI work are seen as an area of rapid professional growth and increased opportunity. Because of this growth, a small team, including myself, at my university actually created the first of its kind, at least in the United States, DEI undergraduate major. They tend to be to train people who want to enter into DEI professions to give them a chance to get the skills necessary to do this kind of work, to be ready to take on that kind of profession. At least in the United States, when people talk about what diversity means, they typically are referring to representations of people in different demographic categories, especially demographic categories that have been historically discriminated against, are underrepresented in a certain kind of profession, or in some other way are marginalized in society. But when I talk about diversity, when I do training programs on DEI, when I teach this topic in the classroom, I always approach diversity from a much broader perspective than that. I mean, it does mean that it is about that, but it's about more than that as well. We can think about diversity of perspectives. We can think about diversity in our data sources. We can think about diversity of experiences. We can think about diversity of experiences related to different professions, which includes their training. As a result, diversifying input and perspectives can be a vital part of improving critical thinking. When we think about resilience, when we think about the benefits that come from diversity or diversifying perspectives, diversifying inputs, we can think about how that relates to improving critical thinking as well. For instance, in decision making, having a diversity of opinions can mean that a group is less prone to groupthink and is able to make better decisions. When we're talking about groupthink, we mean situations in which individuals are compelled to put their individual points aside for what they see or what they believe to be the dominant position. There's a desire for conformity and homogeneity. And that means there's less diversity of perspectives because people see those perspectives as not being welcome. A tragic example of this is the US Challenger Space Shuttle disaster. And this is often provided as an example of what happens when groupthink goes wrong, when groupthink takes over decision-making processes for a negative outcome. In this situation, there were engineers that knew there was a problem with the takeoff, with the projected launch date and time. There had been a intense cold period. There was concerns about how the O-rings in the boosters would perform when there was a lot of cold, when temperatures were going below freezing. Also, in the prelude to the launch, engineers had other concerns about whether or not the shuttle was ready to launch in its current condition. Now, the result was, as we all know, catastrophic, with the loss of all astronauts on board when the Challenger exploded. And this event, for those of us who are Generation X, left an indelible mark on our generations. We were school children at the time. We witnessed or heard about in real time the Challenger disaster. There was a school teacher on board of the Challenger, and so a lot of school children took part in watching this event take place, and the result was there for all of us to see. So when we're in the process of analyzing data, it can become especially important to have perspective and experience. And when we're thinking about what to do with that data, we're trying to analyze that data, those different perspectives, those different experiences, the diversity that we bring in can be vital to giving a more fuller understanding of what that data can mean. Well, a lot of people will say that data speaks for itself, the numbers speak for themselves. I would say that data rarely, if ever, speaks for itself. It requires analysts and analysis to speak for it and say what it could possibly mean, to turn that data into information. And when we're turning data into information, we need to add context to it. And this is why I use the formulation that data plus context equals information. Let's take the following example. We might have the data, the numbers, that an organization has a high attrition rate, meaning that workers are leaving the organization in a certain amount, at a certain rate. But what does this data mean? We know it's a metric of something, but what does it indicate? That depends on who you ask, and that depends on the context. For instance, if workers are leaving because the work environment is toxic, then clearly this is a problem. We don't want people leaving because of a bad work environment. But what if people are leaving because so much professional development has taken place, that they've been trained so well, they've gotten so much support, they've gotten mentoring, that as a result of working there, they're able to leave and find better opportunities someplace else? Or what if the company just changed direction and now you're losing people that no longer fit with the new direction because they fit into the previous direction? Clearly, the first situation is not good, in which people are leaving because the situation is toxic. If people are leaving because they have better opportunities someplace else, that's great. We want that. If people are leaving because of change in direction, that just happens, right? Organizations churn and they change direction, and people may no longer fit the new direction. Might be unfortunate, but it's understandable. So what the data means as information depends upon the context in which it occurs. What data means can also depend on who you ask. For instance, in his book, Team of Teams, General Stanley McChrystal discussed the problem he faced when in command of the Joint Special Operations Command in Iraq from 2003 to 2008. One of the challenges, if you look at his book, and I recommend you look at his book, one of the challenges he was facing was turning data from the field that people in the field were finding when they would enter buildings, or they would take over a location looking for insurgents. The data they would get was not actionable intelligence. It was just data. They didn't know quite what it meant. So they would have to bring the data back. Someone else would have to analyze it. That would have to be sent up the chain of command. The chain of command would have to decide what to do with it. And then they'd have to formulate a plan of action, and then that plan of action would be put into place with another team. Problem was, all of that was moving way too slowly for how events on the ground were actually taking place. By the time all this happened, the intelligence was already old, and opportunities to intercept these insurgent actions were missed. So to solve the problem, General McChrystal took the step of creating what he called a team of teams, or integrating teams with members from other teams. This resulted in a quicker turnaround on the intelligence, on the data that was gathered in the field, and it got turned into information much more quickly because the people who were in a position to analyze it were already there in the field. The teams were diversified so that intelligence could be achieved more quickly and that action could be taken more quickly. Removing silos in organizations and bringing team members together can be an important strategy in data analysis, creating information, and critically analyzing and critically thinking about that data. After all, as authors John Silby Brown and Paul Duguid write in their book, The Social Life of Information, quote, "The ends of information, after all, are human ends. The logic of information must ultimately be the logic of humanity. For all information's independence and extent, it is people in their communities, organizations, and institutions who ultimately decide what it all means and why it matters." Therefore, going back to the concept of diversity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and diversifying, it's not enough to have diverse perspectives. I mean, that's good that we have diverse perspectives, but it's not enough. We also must include, we get to inclusion as part of the EI, we also must include those perspectives in our critical thinking processes. And different perspectives should be given due attention and consideration. That's the equity part, that power does not dominate the conversation in a way that those voices are not heard or drowned out. This doesn't mean that we have to accept and integrate every perspective, but we should at least be able to articulate what perspectives of analysis are being included and why. And we should be able to make sure that we have enough voices present to allow us, to help us think about things differently and improve our critical thinking overall. So, what can you do to diversify your critical thinking? First, you can create a stakeholder analysis map. Do an inventory of who is included and who is not included. Are there any groups and perspectives that should be included that aren't presently? Are they given adequate inclusion into the analytic process? What barriers exist to allow them to do so? If they are allowed to participate, is there such a power differential that only certain perspectives dominate? Second, create cross-functional teams from across elements of the organization and operational theater. Cross-functional teams can be extremely helpful to add diversity to your analysis and diversify your critical thinking. You can also think about cross-hierarchical analysis teams as well. People at different levels of the organization and operation can have very different perspectives, and rather than having those perspectives at odds, we can think about how to bring them together, inclusion, and how to allow those voices to be heard, equity, as part of the process, and thereby enriching the critical thinking process. Third, think in terms of more traditional concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are there marginalized groups that need to be involved? Are these voices included in the deliberation process? And is there equitable distribution of power to inform and act? And when a decision is made, are people told why that decision is made in a way that they can at least understand, so that they do feel included and they do feel there's equity in the process? So in the future, they're more likely to participate. Make sure you add your own perspectives on how to diversify the critical thinking process as well. Share situations in which you've done so and what have been the benefits. Think about situations you might want to do so and how you might plan on going about it. Make sure you add that into the chat group and into the comments as well. Thanks.